morning and welcome to Morning Movie News. So I'm traveling this week, which means it's a whole week of viewer questions on Morning Movie News. Although I will be back on Wednesday to just quickly catch up on any news before I continue my travels. So with the viewer question episodes, I do, usually there are 4 stories, three stories and a viewer question in an episode of Morning Movie News. But for these, it's 3 questions. All right, so I've been asking you to submit all through the month of August, and I've picked a couple of questions for today. If your question isn't picked today, be sure to tune in the rest of the week to catch these episodes and see if yours is included. All right, so starting off, we've got the Star-Lord. And the Star-Lord says, I have a question, Grace. Why is a guy who's arguably 0 for 4 with comic book movies the only director heavily involved in DC's universe so far? And he's talking about, of course, Zack Snyder. Both 300 movies, Watchmen and Man of Steel, all easily get as many negative as positive reviews. Didn't he get the gig by pitching to Nolan during The Dark Knight Rises? Then he just kind of made a meh Superman movie in Nolan's Batman tone? That man has to be on the hottest seat in Hollywood. It'd be awesome if you answered my question, Grace. Keep up the great work from Pittsburgh. I love Pittsburgh. My grandmother lives there. Well, the Star-Lord, and also, they shoot a lot of films in Pittsburgh, Star-Lord, so I'm sure you're getting a front row seat to a lot of cool Hollywood shenanigans. But as for your question, I think, yeah, of course, a lot of people, even myself included, are like, really? Zack Snyder? I mean, when you look at the short list they were considering for Man of Steel, etc., I believe even Duncan Jones was on it at one point. There were different ways they could have gone. Although I would argue that the first 300, I think, was very well received. I think people speak very highly of that. And I think Watchmen is respected, although such a missed opportunity in terms of what it could have been for a movie and making the mainstream realize what an influential comic book and graphic novel that truly is. I think it's still very highly regarded in comic book circles, but I think that if you were to ask your your average moviegoer, they would still not understand just how genius Watchmen really is. And of course, Man of Steel, still very debated as to whether or not that was a successful film. I think I say it underperformed at the box office. Lots of people like to repeat the number and say, "What are you talking about? You're crazy." So Man of Steel really kind of exists in a gray area. But why would they pick Zack Snyder? Well, I think the reason is that Warner Brothers is very much, trying to be a family studio. They are talent-driven. They're relationship-driven. And this is something, of course, Jeff Robinov put together when he was the head of their film studio. He, of course, was forced out because Kevin Sugihara really didn't want to play ball with him. And, he's trying to set up his own, Jeff Robinov will return to Hollywood, I'm sure. It's only a matter of time. Last I heard, he was setting up a financing deal so he could, really go into business himself, producing his own movies independently, and then get a lucrative studio distribution deal. Obviously, not with Warner Brothers. But Jeff Robinov's introduced this whole idea of being very talent-friendly. That's one of the reasons I think that's the other reason that Ben Affleck is Batman, because Warner Brothers wanted to keep him in the fold. And I think that you're also, so how did this start? We'll start with that. Jeff Robinov really kind of, for all intents and purposes, discovered Zack Snyder. He's his guy. He gave him all these gigs. He kept him in-house at the studio. And I think that, Zack Snyder, while creatively you can argue with him, all the movies that have been listed here, Sucker Punch was a rare misstep for Zack Snyder, financially. But these movies are successful financially. He delivers, and his name has some recognition. So he's not a ridiculous choice. You could always argue that, those movies just didn't work out, but they came close, and this one's going to be the one that works out. How many times can you argue that? Hollywood's very good at never really following through on, theoreticals. They just like to start off with they're very optimistic, I guess you could say, especially when it comes to talent, because there's so many other factors at play. It's a business of relationships, people like to say. So Jeff Robinov and Zack Snyder, they get along. Also the agents that get a piece of Zack Snyder's paycheck, they are very aggressive in pushing him for the gig and being like, hey, let's package this whole deal and let's have our agency get a chunk of this business. So there are other aspects always at play. It's never, unfortunately, who's actually just bottom line best for this job. So I think that Snyder got the job because of his relationship with Jeff Robinov, they wanted to keep him in-house. And, that's how they keep these people in-house. They don't want them to go away, so they give them great gigs. And that's the reason that Ben Affleck is Batman, I believe. After Argo, Warner Brothers has put a lot of money and time into, revitalizing Ben Affleck's career. I mean, Ben Affleck, of course, did the brunt of the work, but Warner Brothers backed him up, and they want to reap the benefits of their investment. So when Robinov was forced out, I think there was a lot of concern at the studio that everybody else would leave. All the talent he'd fostered, all the relationships that he'd kept going, would be loyal to him and say, well, I want to leave. Although you didn't see that happen when Dick Cook left Disney. He was also forced out of Disney. Johnny Depp expressed great sadness that Dick Cook had left, because Dick Cook, he said, was one of the main reasons he made the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise and enjoyed being a part of it. But for all of his crocodile tears, Johnny Depp did not walk away from the franchise. Nobody walked away from anything, even though Dick Cook was forced to leave. And the same happened with Jeff Robinov. Talent, I mean, I guess to some degree Christopher Nolan has left, but Nolan stayed true to Legendary, etc. So, Nolan, he's over at Paramount now. That's the main studio behind Interstellar. But so I guess Nolan's really the only talent and that's quite a big one that Warner Brothers lost when Robinov left. Nolan, I'm sure, doesn't have any ill will towards the studio. Maybe he does, who knows? But, I think Nolan is aware that he can write his own ticket at this point, and I think he feels no loyalty to the Warner Brothers regime overall, maybe to Robinov. So maybe when Robinov does get that financing deal in place, and he does have his distribution deal also in place, when that all comes together, maybe you'll see him re-team up with Nolan. That would be very nice. Jeff Robinov is an awesome guy. I've done a couple of red carpets for Warner Brothers, and while he was there, he always stopped to talk to me, and often sometimes saved my piece, because it was hard to get anybody. Warner Brothers red carpets can get crazy, and so it's very hard to get anybody, especially when you're on the internet. They put all the TV camera crews first, so I've always really, really appreciated that from Jeff Robinov, and thought he was just an awesome guy. It's rare to see in Hollywood, so it's just very, very cool. So that's why Ben Affleck, I think they wanted to make sure he stayed in the studio as a Warner Brothers asset. He's always wanted to be Batman. I think he really wants to make up for Daredevil. He doesn't want that to be his superhero legacy. So they said, okay, you can be Batman. And I think that that's what Warner Brothers is doing. I think Warner Brothers is not only trying to make great movies, but of equal importance to them is keeping talent in-house. Talent that they deem, that can make money, that's valuable, I guess the right term is, that they deem as valuable. So even if it maybe takes their properties down a notch, I think that's something that Warner Brothers can live with, because they're trying to go for an overall win. So it's not just with the quality of the film, but it's keeping this talent at Warner Brothers and not seeing it go somewhere else. So that's why I think Snyder has gotten this far, Star-Lord. We'll see if he continues to get that far. I mean, of course, he can only mess up the DC Cinematic Universe so many times before maybe they're like, maybe we should bring somebody else in. So we'll see. We'll see. All right, so that's the first question of the day. The next comes from Barbie Minaj, whose actual name is Faye. So she says, "Hey Grace, it's Faye," smiley face. "I was hoping you would have time to answer my question." I do! I was wondering, DC is clearly banking heavily on the success of Batman v Superman. Something that puzzled me, though, was that the only photo officially released that day was a photo of Wonder Woman. I'm a fan of both Marvel and DC, but I think a flaw of Marvel's is their lack of strong female characters, with the exception of Black Widow, who has yet to get a solo movie. My question is, do you think DC will try to play up their female characters to counteract Marvel? And if they did, do you think the strategy will work? Love your show. Watch it during my break at work while I'm eating lunch. Another smiley face. I love hearing how you guys watch the show. That always makes my day. So thank you, Faye. And I hope you're enjoying your lunch today. So yes, I think, the reason that I think they released that photo of Wonder Woman is that everyone had seen Batman, because Zack Snyder had been tweet happy about the whole thing, putting him in front of the Batmobile. They had that picture of him at the booth at Comic-Con, where you could see, a three-quarter profile of Ben Affleck as Batman. And of course, everyone had already seen Henry Cavill in Man of Steel. So I don't think it was that she was the female character, Faye. I think it was more that she was the one they had left to reveal. And they wanted a big reveal, and I think they knew it was only a matter of time before maybe it leaked. So they were like, let's get this out there, and a really great photo. Well, I mean, there's debatable how great it is. I think it's medium. But and I think, although as I said, I think Gal Gadot looks like she's really doing a nice job, despite the hair and costume maybe letting her down a little bit. But let's get an official badass photo out there so that everybody can work off of that instead of maybe something leaking that doesn't present it to the best of its abilities, because first impressions count. But yes, it was great to see everybody talking about a female character, and Wonder Woman is probably, I guess you could say, the most iconic female superhero there is. I think Marvel's mutant characters, the X-Men, have become, I think a bigger deal and better developed characters. I think Wonder Woman is incredibly tricky. I've talked to people at DC, especially back in my comic book days, and they have remarked that even in-house they don't know what to do with Wonder Woman. There are arguments as to how best to portray her. And so we'll see if maybe the movie can put it to bed, can, define that definitive depiction of her, or if it just blows up in their face. And that's where I think you're going to run into trouble. Wonder Woman might not work out. And then Marvel will be like, see, we told you, chick superhero movies are a waste of time. They belong in the background, helping everybody out. Black Widow, I think, is, to Marvel's credit, as much at the forefront as she can be without having a solo movie. They keep teaming her up with really great male characters, and I think she was a huge part of Captain America: The Winter Soldier. You could argue that was, to some degree, almost as much her movie as Steve Rogers. But I don't know what it's going to take to push everybody else into this field of having solo female superhero movies. But when we discussed this recently about the Sony doing this with their Spider-Man cinematic universe, somebody pointed out, there have been female characters. There's been Catwoman, Supergirl, Elektra, etc. But, as this person pointed out, the problem with female superhero movies isn't that people don't want to see female superheroes, is that they keep getting crappy movies. So let's see, that's the big question here. Not just if they present her and they push her to the forefront, but if Warner Bros. Actually does a great job with the character and if she's someone audiences come to love and want to see, because no amount of promotion is going to fix a bad character. So we'll see what happens. Although I really liked Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman in Batman Returns. They were going to make a solo movie back then with Michelle Pfeiffer. It never materialized, but that's a great example again of a great female character who benefits from fantastic writing and a fantastic performance. Michelle Pfeiffer, still to this day, one of the best just performances, forget superhero performances, I think, in film. Certainly in this genre. So to answer your question, Faye, I don't know what it's going to take to get a female superhero out there in a solo movie, but I think the way things are coming together, Wonder Woman being kind of Xena light, a lot of people are unhappy with that. Sony having, their Spider-Man universes falling apart around them, and having this female character might be more of a gimmick because they're just trying to get people invested in something that's falling apart. That I think we might be heading to another area where we have more bad female superhero movies. So we'll see what happens. Well, we're all just going to have to wait to see how Gal Gadot comes across. But it is great that everybody was talking about a female superhero at Comic-Con, right? All right, let's see her in action. I hope she can fly. I hope she can fly. I think that's really crucial to her character. All right, so that's the second question of the day. The third question, the final question for today's episode, comes from Sil, a.k.a. Sildermillion. All right, so Sildermillion says, "Hi, Grace. You often mention that we vote for a movie with the ticket price. When you buy a ticket for a movie, you're voting for it, essentially telling Hollywood you want to see more of that, or you're interested in this property." So Sil says, "I'm one of those people who doesn't go to the theaters all that often, maybe once a month. I wonder how often the average moviegoer does go to the movies, because I know very few regular moviegoers." All right, let me just take a moment to answer that question. That's true. The majority of people do not go to the movies a lot. There's a certain core demographic, particularly in the big cities on the coasts. The biggest theaters, I believe, the biggest grossing theaters are in New York and Los Angeles, and also Atlanta often pops up there as well. Those are the movie theaters that do the best and are always the highest grossing every week, and that's where you have a lot of people who just go to the movies every weekend. It's something that they regularly do, and even they'll see a movie they're not super excited about just because they like going. But the majority of moviegoers, the group that you need to get into the theater in order to have a big box office success, really only does go about once a month still, as you said. That's why movie studios have to campaign so aggressively, and why you're seeing such an emphasis on blockbusters, because they're like, this will get people out of their house. Whereas the other film, they're content to wait to watch it on demand, as you are doing, Sil, because that's parlays into Sil's next part of the question. So Sil says, On the day that you covered, the Barbie movie and Assassin's Creed, you talked about how movies make money from the theater run, but you also talked about how movies make money from on demand. I'm really curious to know, how do movies make money from other viewing options like Redbox, Netflix, and Amazon Prime Instant, especially the latter two, where certain movies are free if you have a subscription. If you watch with these options, are you still voting for the movie? 100% still. Don't feel guilty about not going to a movie. Don't let Hollywood do that to you. You only pay for what you think you need to see or what you want to see. But when you do go and watch a movie later on, that movie, part of that, a percentage still goes to Hollywood. And if a movie does not so great in theaters, but finds a huge audience later on in life, on demand and streaming and rentals, etc., you will find a sequel. For instance, famously, that's why they made another Austin Powers film. The first Austin Powers was a cult hit when it hit theaters, but it did not at all do well at the box office. However, it did so well as a rental and was so popular that they decided to make a sequel, which did infinitely better box office business because the property had so much more exposure by then. Also, Mrs. Doubtfire, we recently talked about Mrs. Doubtfire. They're finally making a sequel to that film decades after the first one. And that's because Mrs. Doubtfire, to this day, continues to be one of the most watched movies on demand and streaming, etc., by moviegoers, even though it's so old. So clearly, Hollywood looks at that and says, there's an interest. We should capitalize on that. So yes, you can vote for a movie at different levels, and as long as you see it at some point, Hollywood that counts as a vote. Especially when if you really want to see your money count towards a property, either go and see it opening weekend or like the first couple of weeks that's in theaters. That's when Hollywood's really paying attention. And then also when it first comes out on demand, streaming, etc. It'll always matter if enough people down the line, like look at Mrs. Doubtfire. Even today, it's Hollywood's taking notice of who's downloading it. But if you really want to help, especially in today's front-loaded business model in Hollywood, right away get in there, either in film, either when it comes to the theaters or when it's going on to your digital devices. Either one will make an impression with Hollywood. So I hope that answers your question, Sil. Thank you so much for asking. Thank you everybody for asking today. Thank you Star-Lord, thank you Faye, and thank you Sil. I appreciate your questions so much. I hope that you enjoyed the answers. I hope everybody did. And everyone, write your thoughts down below what you think of today's 3 questions. And also, I will be going back to these videos to look for questions when I get back from traveling. So of course, enter those down below for what you would like to see answered here on the show. Thank you so much for tuning in, and tune in tomorrow for more viewer questions.